Okay, I'm really convinced that we're about to see yet another seismic change in Formula One. That Renault by this time next year will be completely gone. And the start of this change isn't coming soon, in my opinion. I think it's already happening. The catalyst for this video doesn't just stem from the fact that Oliver Oakes was the co-founder of the entity known as Hitech GP a decade ago. There's a lot more to it than that I will cover in today's video. And it all seems to be done in the shadows amidst Renault's intentions with Formula One and going into the next era of Formula One, and whether or not it is worth carrying on. And as we already know, after many months of deliberation, Renault has decided that no, it's not worth continuing Formula One as a power unit supplier. Whether or not it will return with the new engines coming for 2030 perhaps, it remains to be seen, but probably not. So then when the news broke that Mercedes would be supplying Alpine with engines for 2026, it just did not sit right with me or the entire community. Alpine Mercedes? What is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. When was the last time Renault and Mercedes worked together in F1? Well, okay, admittedly, in terms of cars, they have worked together, because did you know the Smart 44 and the Renault Twingo, that was a joint venture between both companies. There is a connection in that sense, but Formula One? Nah, you're having me on. There's got to be something else happening here. Renault's certainly going to be leaving F1 in terms of actually having a named entity as a team. And I've got a good feeling that it has something to do with that FIA expression of interest from back in 2023. The one that Andretti was accepted and other teams were rejected, without any reason being cited publicly other than financial concerns. But it doesn't just stop there, because I feel like Hitech will be getting into Formula One in a different way, and it might have something to do with the history and future of Team Enstone, and that maybe Renault might be parting ways with that base for the first time since 2000, when they bought the team from Benetton for 75 million quid. This all stems back to that rejected bid, which saw Hitech's attempts to become F1's 11th team being curtailed. The entry that superseded them has now morphed into an enhanced General Motors bid. Hitech and their Kazakh billionaire Vladimir Kim did not peg this lying down seemingly, and reportedly took the FIA to court about this, according to the Green Notebook from Joe Sword, which I do recall being mentioned back last year in very light passing. No, seriously, I recall maybe a couple of snippets on social media, one article, and then there was nothing. It was almost blink and you'll miss it. I'm like, did I imagine that? Them reportedly arguing that the FIA had interfered with what should be the responsibility of Formula One management, the commercial side of F1. Now that is really interesting. It seems like the complete opposite of what Andretti had to go through, where it was FOM interfering with what the FIA deemed as perfectly acceptable, viable and ready to race. So, with Sword certain that Oliver Oakes' outfit will be paid handsomely in compensation, there could be a chance of them getting into F1 in the end anyway. Perhaps they could ask the FIA to take another look at their application. Maybe they could be getting onto the grid as that fabled 12th team, because, according to Mario Andretti, FIA and Formula One, they are certainly looking at maybe bringing on yet another team to actually fill the quota that the current Concord agreement actually says is possible within Formula One. All the circuits have to have 12 garages ready to go for 12 teams. Although it is my honest opinion that that 12th entity will eventually be taken up by the likes of Hyundai with their Genesis brand, because they've been making a very strong push with additional programs in endurance and hypercars and hybrid racing. And from a drama point of view, I want Cyril Abiteboul to be back in Formula One as the Hyundai F1 team's team principal, because I want him to be there in the same room as Christian Horner again, tormenting him. However, it doesn't seem to be the case that Hitech is going to be maybe trying again to become another team. Keen to get on the grid as soon as possible in 2026, so if they tried to do so now, there wouldn't be enough time or resources to actually make this team from scratch and make it competitive. So, with this supposed legal victory behind them, I reckon Oakes could do the next best thing, and use all of that compensation money, supposedly, to go towards something else. This isn't the first time Renault has done this. They sold a majority stake to G9 Capital for 2011. That's why Team Enstone became Lotus F1 or Lotus Team, or oh my goodness, that 2011 situation where we had two Team Lotuses on the grid at the same time, and then there was a dispute as to who actually owned the name, and then it just completely spiraled. It was so confusing at the time. But either way, Renault did sell off a huge chunk of that team to somebody else, and then bought it back from them, all for the symbolic sum of £1. And they're probably going to get several hundred million quid for it in return if they sell it to the likes of Hitech and Kim and other investors. So I think Renault will be actually making a good chunk of change out of this. Okay, Law, this is all very well and good, I hear you say, but it all seems to be rather speculative and dry and bland and business orientated. Okay, yeah, I hear you, and I'm about to get to that. And it also comes from comments from one of their incumbent drivers. No, I'm not talking about Ocon because he's already gone now. I'm talking about Pierre Gasly. So do you recall when Pierre arrived at Alpine, he was keen to forge his own destiny after spending 96 races driving for the Red Bull Junior team, hoping to get back to Red Bull but never ultimately succeeding? A figure, by the way, which Yuki Tsunoda is about to approach himself, and if he sticks around next year, will eclipse. So that's wild. But one of the things I covered on the channel when I was making videos about how Pierre Gasly had no choice and that his future looked uncertain with Alpine sinking toward ninth in the constructors, Gasly wanted and idolized working with a works operation, having sampled that somewhat with the likes of Honda when he and Verstappen were the pioneering duo when Honda took over with Red Bull after exploring with Toro Rosso. So you then got a diluted element of that with Toro Rosso and then AlphaTauri, but he gained experience realizing that if you're working for a engine supplier that is fully committed to you, then that is ideal, and Alpine is the next best thing if other seats weren't available at the time. But then all of that went quiet, and then, amidst all of the speculation about the future of Renault in Formula One, Gasly tweaked what he felt about that. I mean, he still talked about, you know, being with a works team is really ideal. It's really flexible, everything is optimized, and you can easily change things on a dime, and you don't have to go through many meetings or red tape or logistics and try to make things fit. He stated that upon reflection, it wasn't as much of a deal to be a works operation because you could be a customer operation and still succeed in Formula One, citing McLaren's rise to the top, saying that even them being a customer of Mercedes, they can still go on to eclipse their suppliers. Now, at that time, I took it as face value. I thought it was a case of Gasly sort of going, ooh, things aren't looking good here. And the comments that I made before, being part of a works team, oh, that's not good. So, okay, change tack. I feel like Pierre was preparing himself when all this news would break out, and then people would go towards those comments and say, Pierre, didn't you say that being with a works team was good, and now they're not a works team anymore? So what are you saying about your future, and what say you about the team itself? And then, you know, criticism, confusion, awkwardness. So it was best to kind of backpedal back then, so he can then cite it later. But either way, I feel like maybe Pierre knew something was afoot, with Briatore maybe beginning the exploration phase of the development, whether or not it was worth continuing with Renault. But I don't think he was quite sure as to who would be their eventual supplier. I don't think he knew it would be Mercedes. I think a lot of stuff behind the scenes is going on, and they're keeping Pierre informed every step of the way since, you know, he is the bastion of that team now. He is their leader. They do not want him to leave because he is a good benchmark for all concerned, and he is competitive. Because look at what he did in Qatar. That Alpine car, top 5 on merit. If you give Gasly a car he can work with and is now optimized for him specifically, he can make that car dance. So why would Alpine want to get rid of him? Oh, and by the way, Pierre, that whole comment about McLaren, I feel like it's a little bit misinformed because the deal that McLaren has with Mercedes is quite a bit different, according to Zach Brown, than what Aston Martin or Williams have, and maybe Alpine might have. Because according to the CEO of McLaren, they have a seat at the table arrangement with Mercedes high power performance when it comes to the development of the engine and how it's packaged in the McLaren, because they make their own rear suspension and gearbox McLaren, unlike the other customers. Maybe McLaren has some influence in how the engine is refined, and Mercedes HPP, the makers of the actual engines, would be keen in their own way to have any kind of success if their own works manufacturer team led by Toto can't get it. So let's get back to where we are right now. Alpine, at this precise moment, is now beginning a mini renaissance, as it were. All the work they've been doing behind the scenes to try and rejig their development department, including David Sanchez and his work that he managed to get inspiration from McLaren, and him now being in charge at Alpine, it's now starting to turn a corner. The car is no longer a behemoth and really, really slow. The Renault engine, sure, it may not be one of the most powerful out there, but the car's performance seems to be making up for that it can score some decent points. But Briatore and Oaks, they're the men in charge of turning the fortunes of Team Enstone around. The former having a personal connection to the base, having led it to glorious Benetton, and then admittedly disrepute after 2008's Crashgate, which he then took a lifetime ban for, but then that was later overturned in the courts. But regardless, he has history with that team, and he is probably keen for it to turn around, since he spent so much of his formative years in Formula One with that organisation, and brought it to success. and now it's fallen on hard times and could be at risk of falling even further behind, and so far, he is doing a good job. Say what you will about his character. And then, in terms of the day-to-day stuff, since, he is in his mid-70s, you can't expect him to run a team on the daily at his age and his inclination. Oliver Oakes, he's an up-and-coming guy. He's admittedly younger than me, and much like Christian Horner, when Red Bull took him on, he was in his mid-30s, and he has a lot of good positive credentials, and of course he has the right backing. Hitech has a lot of interesting fingers in many different junior feeder series pies, including FIA's F3 and F2 championships. And since they wanted to have their own F1 team with this application but were then denied, they're now doing what Ben Sulayem himself recommended to Andretti amidst all the stonewalling of F1's commercial arm after they outrightly objected. Just buy out an existing team. And who better to do it with than the team that many people speculated would be the first ones to sell. Now, let's be real. I had a really big feeling, and I'm sure that many of you did as well, that if any F1 team was in a position to maybe sell itself, it would have either been Haas or Alpine. Right now, no. Haas isn't going to sell itself because Gene Haas, times are good, and they're probably going to get even better. But as far as I'm concerned, they've just gone back to what they were originally planning, to have a majority stake of the team and then other investors coming in, or maybe Sauber having some kind of part of it. So, it's just come round again full circle. But the writing was on the wall right after Daniel Ricciardo's departure, and he may not have been the main factor, but he was probably the final nail in the coffin for Renault to maybe take a tonal shift with the team, to maybe change its name into something that might be a lesser-known sub-brand of the organisation. Because I must admit, I barely knew what Alpine was, and I'm sure that many people had no clue. But that would have had a double benefit for the likes of Renault in that group, because Alpine, it would have had more brand awareness, and it would then maybe go on to sell some more of its cars, and it's now branching out into MotoGP with the Pramac team. Alpine's a major sponsor. And also, if you say Alpine finished 4th in the Constructors, that sounds pretty nifty. Whereas Renault finishes 4th in the Constructors, I mean, it's all right, but it's nothing like the glory days where Fernando Alonso took them to the championship. There is historical ties to much greater success. If you do it with Alpine, the slate is wiped clean, in a way, amongst many average Formula 1 fans. But even 4th now looks quite heady for them, and with years of chronic underinvestment in the current power unit, which they themselves have admitted was a problem, and was the subject of extreme derision and contempt from one Christian Horner, Renault have simply decided to just give up, stop chasing success, because now that I think about it, they might have to, because the car company isn't in the best of shape, and its sister company Nissan is in even worse shape. Because many people are now speculating across the world of automotive journalism that Nissan may not even make it through next year. They might go belly up, and right now, it's in part of a Renault-Mitsubishi-Nissan alliance, so if Nissan goes under, that's going to seriously impact the likes of Renault. They probably need to find a lot of cash to prop up that company, so that means their own investment doesn't go under. It's very chaotic in the car front, the F1 team's not really performing, so the best thing to do is to sell some of it off for hundreds of millions of dollars, and that would be huge emergency relief for the likes of Nissan, so that maybe it can turn things around and maybe restructure itself outside of bankruptcy. I know I probably got a little bit detailed in there, but I didn't realize this news until I found out that Nissan maybe had 12 or 14 months left to live. And now that I think about it, yeah, of course Renault would sell, because it's not just to do with the performance of the F1 team, it's to do with the performance of everything else. Because after 2026, the long-held engine freeze brought on by Red Bull will be gone, and that gave Renault a stay of execution. Engine makers would be developing like crazy, and Renault probably didn't want to have any part of that, so we are where we are right now. So in my own humble opinion, I feel like what Renault is doing right now is making a very slow and steady transition behind the scenes to make sure that the F1 team isn't disrupted in any extreme manner, meaning that would lead to poorer performance. Because you've got to admit that what's going on here right now with this restructuring, it is having some kind of positive benefit, even though the troubles of earlier times before Oliver Oakes came along still ring true, and the awkward divorce with Esteban Ocon played out the way it did. It's still not ideal, and I think Alpine's still got a lot of work to do to really make itself squeaky clean again. I do feel like it is having some sort of positive influence. When it does happen, and when it's announced, and the first race of 2026 rolls along, it's just a case of changing the branding and maybe changing a few stickers, and then that's that. Renault quietly goes back into as a minority stake or something like that, so that maybe it keeps one foot in the game in case things change and they might want to get back in F1 again. But Oaks' appointment is one thing, Mercedes having history with Hitech is another. But then there's Paul Aron to consider. Him being plucked from an uncertain future, brought into the Alpine fold as their go-to reserve driver for next year, being the biggest red flag possible for this situation, but not the only flag when it comes to drivers, as I'll explain in a moment. Because I don't recall Oliver Oaks saying that him becoming the team principal of Alpine means that he is stepping down as the founder of Hitech and divesting himself of any involvement there. No, I've not heard that at all. He's there doing double duty, as it were, so running Alpine and also overseeing Hitech's efforts. So something doesn't compute here, and something's telling me that the two will combine eventually, and Paul Aron has a very big key role in all of this, where things might go. And I wouldn't be surprised that he'll either be sat next to Pierre Gasly or Jack Doohan next year, depending whether or not Pierre is convinced, or maybe he might find a seat somewhere else which is better. I mean, that's a long shot, but I think Paul Aron is their ultimate insurance policy, because he has proven himself quite good in F2, because that has been a really volatile season. Drivers have come and gone, whereas Paul Aron's remained relatively consistent, and should Bortoleto or Hadjar take each other out, or the Mechachrome engines go bang, as they are partial to doing, or something else could happen, the clutch could break. There are many factors that could mean that Paul Aron, despite all of the middling results in comparison to Bortoleto and Hadjar winning everything, could actually become champion. And then Alpine can be proudly saying, well, we have the F2 champion on our books, like we had with Oscar. Yeah, look at us. But as I touched upon, it's not just Aron's appointment that has got me interested in all this, it's the smaller ones as well, particularly to do with the F1 Academy. Because just recently, Alpine appointed the successor to Abby Pulling in that series, Nina Garderman. She was announced just the other day to be taking on the role for the squad Alpine in F1 Academy. There you go. You might be thinking, so what? Well, if you look to Hitech's own website, Nina will be racing for them in the Formula Winter Series of Europe over the F1 off-season, including the likes of Portimao, Barcelona and what have you, to most likely prepare herself for F1 Academy next year. You are hearing that right. A driver being backed by Alpine in F1 Academy, also having connections with Hitech, as well as something to do with British Formula 4. So, yeah, that is screaming out to me, yep, this is getting now down into the nitty-gritty. This is getting into the minutiae of the DNA of Alpine, and that maybe we might be seeing more and more of these news stories that Hitech affiliation with Alpine will become quite common. The de rigueur. It wouldn't be surprising. It's going to continue to evolve over the next few months. Yes, I understand Nina Garderman's role in F1 Academy with Alpine is being backed up by Roden Motorsport since they provide cars there, but that is mainly down to the fact that Hitech does not supply cars for that series, at least not yet. But if they did, don't be surprised if you get any more backers with the Alpine name or whatever it becomes in the future. But the fact of the matter is, though, is that Nina and Paul have connections to that junior feeder team. And also, at the same time, there's the Alpine Academy to consider, because in becoming the reserve driver for the Alpine F1 team in 2025, Paul Aron has managed to leapfrog all of the Alpine Academy drivers who are or will be in F2 next year, which includes the likes of Victor Martin, Kush Maini, Gabriele Mini. All of them are now having to play second fiddle, maybe either having to do another season in F2, or maybe leaving single-seaters altogether, the funding running out, or maybe they might decide to just go it alone, realizing that, hey, the jig is up. F1, oh, forget that. Paul's right there. And I suspect that Jack will be the next in line to get the chop if he's not careful or not good enough. Put simply, I don't think he's a priority anymore for either Oaks or Briatore, nor are any of the present Alpine Academy stars. And Jack most likely secured the deal to replace Esteban Ocon at Alpine before Oaks stepped in, since we all recall that Jack was about to step in at the Canadian Grand Prix after Bruno Faman went thermonuclear over Esteban, save for the Alpine legal team deciding to get involved and stopping something rash happening, or maybe a really big court case from happening and Ocon leaving the team altogether. And now, through no fault of his own, Jack Doohan's F1 career is hanging by a thread, and that is seriously unfair. No rookie should be going into Formula 1, something that they have been chasing for pretty much all of their lives. The new owners or organisers of this team are basically, And I think effectively going, yeah, we'll fulfill it, but yeah, you've got maybe 5 races, mate, because that's what the rumours are saying, that his contract could be torn up before the season begins, and that maybe this one time in Abu Dhabi might be his only chance to impress before that could happen, or maybe he's only got the flyaway races of 2025 to prove himself before maybe he could be replaced by Paul Aron, that maybe this is a token gesture. But still, this is negative talk, and Jack does not need that after all of the work he's put in and the fact he is a good driver. He was, I believe, in the top 3 of F2 last year. So he isn't some sort of also-ran who got lucky with the Alpine Academy. No, he was their next in line after Oscar Piastri departed them. And to top it all off, the reason why I think this is unfair for Jack, because sure, getting an opportunity right now to get into an F1 weekend is cool, but the stakes right now for Alpine are really, really high. There's $10 million at play here, $10 million that Alpine probably thought that they would not be getting back at Spa this year, when things really took a turn for the worse, or uncertain or something like that. Because now it's up to Jack to either not crash the car, or maybe score a point or two and deny Haas that place of 6th place in the Constructors, because that's a lot of pressure. Had they remained 9th, there would be no pressure, and it'd be like, oh cool, Jack's getting an opportunity early, nice. But now, if he underdelivers, and then Pierre has a problem, and then Haas romp away with points and take that place, and they drop to 7th, that will be on Jack's conscience, and that will be a serious consideration amongst the likes of Oaks and Briatore when they make their decision further on into 2025. There will be Paul Aron in the background, probably doing another season of F2, this time with Alpine backing, and then maybe he could be getting time in the A523, some investment in the historic Renault cars to maybe get some training, kind of like what Piastri and Doohan had before him. So he will be getting a lot of investment put into his development, and that could then morph into Hitech, and then that could mean that he'll be ready to pounce in case Jack underdelivers, or maybe Briatore and Oaks kick things up a gear, and they announce that Renault or Alpine or whatever will become Hitech. So yeah, I'm going into this right now thinking that the inevitable is about to happen, and that the current Alpine crop of drivers, their futures aren't safe, and that includes Jack, and that is a crying shame. So I would urge all of you out there to keep a close eye on what goes on with this team. You might have objections with Briatore, but a lot of things could be happening here, which could see Renault disappearing from Formula One altogether, save for them being a minority investor, just so that means they have some skin in the game in which to maybe gain some more money, especially if this team improves, they then become more valuable, and then Renault might make even more money. So it's just becoming a cash exercise for them instead of them wanting glory as a Formula One manufacturer. It's quite depressing, and it's a sad way to go. It's a bit of a whimper, but I think the reality is that case, because Alpine Mercedes just no, that doesn't fit. And it might mean that Jack's career might be up against the wall before it even began. And that similar notion might have been a contributing factor as to why talks with Franco Colapinto there faced an uphill struggle, because it failed to convert. But I'm not worried about that at all. He would have had the same yardstick to deal with as Jack will have next year. So why would he want to deal with that? And you can find out more about why I think this in this video here that you can go and watch right now.